Good morning, everyone. We are waiting for a couple of people to join and then we'll start. All right. Once again, a very good morning to all of you. I welcome you all to the post budget analysis of the Union government finances and fiscal strategies. So, the current budget was presented at a time of heightened global uncertainties, which was marked by political tensions, then fragmented global trade architecture, and a growing inward turn among major economies. Against this backdrop, India continues to articulate its vision towards Viksit Bharat 2047, and we continue to pursue this growth ambition while maintaining fiscal prudence and macroeconomic stability. We require a careful examination of how the union government is deciding to mobilize its resources, allocating spending across competing priorities, and managing fiscal risks. In this context, Pehle India Foundation is hosting this post budget analysis of how we are continuing to promote our priorities as well as maintaining fiscal prudence. So, in this time, we are having this discussion to promote informed, evidence based dialogue on India's economic and public policy choices. I would welcome our chairperson, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, to share his views on the budget 2026-27. And I would also like to inform the attendees that we'll be taking all question and answers at the end. Thank you so much. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Amriddhi. And let's switch to the PPT, if you can, please. Yeah, so I can't see your screen. Yeah, so I just want to spend a few minutes on what I think are the real highlights or the achievements of the budget. We can go to the next slide. And for me, the continued fiscal consolidation with the target of 4.3% of fiscal deficit for 26-27 was, I think, was one of the highlights. The second highlight is the resetting of the one earlier, the resetting of the disinvestment target, which is now targeted at 80,000 crore. This is a very good augury because for the last few years, this investment had been almost forgotten, and I think that is now having this sort of comeback. I think is a very good very good sign for the fiscal situation, because the share of non-tax revenues can therefore rise. So and the third, and this is where I'll end, is that the continued emphasis on public capex, a rise by 9.7% to 12 lakh crore, I think is a very good trend, because that will hopefully crowd in the private investment as well. So I'll carry on for about 20-25 minutes and then carry on and then get the questions. So as you see in this slide here, as I said, mentioned already, the target is 4.3% for fiscal deficit, brought down from 9% when we had the COVID period. And but please look at the slide, the graph below, which is the revenue deficit, and that's still 1.5% of GDP. Now, the revenue deficit implies always that you're borrowing to consume, and that's not a good sign. And I think this is something that we have forgotten about, and nobody talks about it any longer. But I think the more we can focus on generating a revenue surplus in our budget, the better off we will be, because that would mean that our borrowing will go down. And although our fiscal deficit is 4.3, our gross borrowing requirement, is the same for 26-27 as it was for FY25. So the revenue deficit should be a focus of all budget discussions, but it has not been. Next, Samriddhi. Next slide. Hello.
Yes, sir. Just a second. I'm facing some technical glitch here. Can you see my slide now?
Yeah.
Sorry, sir. Please go ahead.
Is that so? So the revenue deficit contributes, as I said, to the extra borrowing. So the debt to GDP ratio, which is which is now going to be brought down to 55% from 56%. That's still quite high, because combined with the state debt, the total it becomes about 82%, and the FRBM target is 40%. So what the FM promised, that she'll bring down the debt to GDP for central government to 50% by 2031. I hope it has happened, but that still is very high. We should understand this in the context of what is the government take on domestic savings. And if your debt is 55% of GDP, and your gross borrowing is in excess of 17 lakh crores, that means that all that domestic saving is not available for private investment, and which keeps the cost of capital in our country very high. So the sooner we can bring down this debt to GDP ratio, the better off we would be, and which is why I'm very happy to note in today's headlines that the finance minister is talking now about greater disinvestment and also asset monetization, which did not figure into the budget speech, but I'm glad to see it in the FM speech today, because asset monetization and disinvestment being used to liquidate our debt will be a very good sign, very good augury for our fiscal position going forward. Next. Details of direct tax receipts and indirect tax receipts, they are here. I don't want to spend too much time except to say that the tax buoyancy overall has been assumed at 0.8%. The finance minister assumed a GDP growth rate, nominal GDP growth rate of 10%, which means the GLGDP growth rate could be about 7.5%, but the growth in tax receipts is about 0.8%. So that means a tax buoyancy of 0.8, which is okay, but this also implies that we need to spread our tax net wider to get the tax buoyancy up to about at least 1, so that our receipts rise by as much as our nominal GDP. Next, Samriddhi. Direct tax, a share of GDP, you can see is come down a little bit for the next year, about the same, and indirect taxes are also, can't see it here, but yeah, but it's also come down to 2.58. So I think this is, as I said, we need to really sort of try and get the tax net to be wider here. It will be nice to note that the economic survey talked about our direct tax filers, personal income tax filers, having increased to 9 crore. But the fact of the matter is that 66% of those who file personal income tax file a zero income tax, zero tax liability. So therefore, some thought should be given to the tax exemption limits and also on how to make the tax net wider both for the direct and for the indirect taxes. Next. I mentioned this already about disinvestments. I'm very happy to see the disinvestment target going up to 80,000 crore. I would have been happier if this would have included also a target for asset monetization, which could be much larger, but it's not there. And I hope during the course of the year, this will happen. Next. On the expenditure, now coming to expenditure from receipts, first to point out the fact that capital expenditure is gone up again to 12.21 lakh crore. In terms of share of GDP, it's stagnant from last year, but that's all right because I think there is a limit to what public expenditure can be. And I think we have seen, at least for the last 2 or 3 years, that increasing public capex has not really crowded in private expenditure. And so therefore we need to do something more about that, but I think it's good to keep it up like that. Debt servicing is 26% of the expenditure and 40% of our receipts. So, which is interest and principal payments. Now that's very high, as I said earlier, and so therefore we need a very active policy for reducing the debt to GDP ratio, which I hope will come about as the year goes forward. Next. And here again you see the contrast which I want to bring out, which is that the expenditure on subsidies, which is about 7.6% of total expenditure, is higher than health and education by a margin. Health and education, the light orange line that you see on the left hand side is hardly about 3.68%, and is 4.6%, and its subsidies are 7.6. And the slightly worrisome part here also is that the share of food subsidies is rising. Now that's something that we can't really continue with, because that just would mean that our the sort of virtuous cycle that we want to build will not be available. The defense expenditure has increased expectedly after Operation Sindoor from 12.9 in 24-25 now to 14.6%. That's unavoidable. That has to be maintained. If we include all the other expenditure that are included in the Home Ministry expenditure, which are paramilitary forces, this will probably be higher. But I must confess my disappointment at the very low share of environment, 0.07% of total expenditure. That's not in keeping with India's commitment to net zero by 2070, but also not in keeping with our own really urgent requirements of improving our AQI, our air pollution, our water pollution, our snow, Himalaya, Asian brown cloud. So I hope that this will be revised during the budget session, and a higher allocation will be made to environment, including water, by the way. Next. So these are the important things that the finance minister said, which is good to note that these are frontier sectors. These are forward-looking centers: semiconductor mission, electronics component manufacturing scheme, rare earth corridor, 3 chemical parks, and so all of these are sort of industries of the future. And this is why I think it's really good to see that much being allocated to these sectors. Now, creating champion MSMEs, I hope the execution will be in line with the budget announcement, and developing city economic regions. I think the finance minister is saying that he recognizes cities as the drivers of growth, and therefore it will develop these. And then seven strategic sectors that I mentioned already, and 200 legacy industrial sectors. But here also, her announcement about the textiles, that there are an integrated plan for textile rejuvenation. I think very important, especially in the context of the India-EU FTA, because now India, hopefully textile exports to EU will have zero duties, and also now the US has declared our reduction in duties to 18%. So this is the big opportunity for pushing up our labor-intensive exports for textiles, garments, and leather, and even gems and jewelries. So I think here, creating the champion MSMEs, the 10,000 crore fund that she has declared for equity investment in the MSMEs, I think all will count. And I think we need a real push here for in the year for to making the best use of our opportunity of the India-EU FTA, and also the lowering of the duties by the US. Next. So there, I think some of these I repeated already, the 10,000 crore MSME fund, Self-Reliant India Fund, and then trades mandated for CPSE purchases, which will help the MSMEs again. And the ease of doing business has been reduced to creating this corporate Mitras for compliance support in Tier 2 and Tier 3 towns. And although the finance minister mentioned the ease of doing business, I would have really liked a much greater emphasis on how to reduce the compliance burden and regulatory burden on the Indian private sector. And a very clear statement today is required that the government will be in support of the private sector in whatever endeavors it takes, especially for labor intensive sectors like, as I said, textiles, garments, apparels, leather, and tourism. And for tourism, there has been an announcement about setting up a Buddhist circuit in the Northeast. And I hope tourism will get a much bigger allocation moving forward. Next. Here you see what you see here is that the industrial sector, is which is the agriculture sector is sort of down, but the real addition to the GDP is coming from the services sector, and the services sector is not as labor intensive as manufacturing and sector. And I think, but the more important here is that the agricultural sector, which is really quite in our countries, and we can discuss the detail later on, is employing 43% of the workforce, producing just 18% of our GDP. That needs a real fillip and a transformative paradigm, which I hope will be done in the subsequent budget. Now here, if you look at the right hand side on the bank credit, the disappointing thing is the dark orange line, which is the share of bank credit to industry, which has declined from 26% in 21-22 to 21.6% in 24-25. And there are no signs of it coming back again. Now, and the biggest gain on that is personal loans, which is 32%. Now, these are okay, but this also is showing up in other figures on increasing indebtedness of the households in India. And that's something that we need to watch out for. RBI is taking cognizance of it, but somehow or the other, we need to increase the credit flow from commercial banks to the industrial sector, and that will also support the rise of the private capex in the country. Next. 5,000 crore per city economic region for 5 years, and the 7 high-speed corridors, which she announced, I think is a very good infrastructure development, infrastructure growth. But some of it is already like Mumbai, Pune, Bangalore, Chennai. I think it'll be good. But I was very thrilled to see the announcement about one girls' hostel in every district through challenge mode. And through challenge mode means that private sector will be involved, and the private sector will be invited to put up these hostels. And I hope it happens, because the sooner we can do this, the better off. The higher will be the female labor force participation rate, which is increasing, but still well below the international norms in our country. The high level committee on banking, the mandate, the terms of reference for this committee have not been announced. I hope it will include the privatization of some of our public sector banks, so that we can create some 3 or 4 very large banks in our country. What I want to remind the listener participants here is that in the last 6 months, there has been significant infusion of foreign capital in our banking sector. MUFG has invested, I think, $3 billion in the Shriram group. There was a big SNBC gifted about 2 billion in the Yes Bank. There was another from UAE. So 4 or 5 very big investments, and that happened because the government just liberalized some of the features for foreign banking, and I hope that continues. And then so therefore, this is, I think, an important point. The restructuring of power finance and rural has been on the cards for last several years. They were supposed to be merged, but have not, have stayed independent. I hope that merger will then finally come about, and the green financing of energy, of energy transition will, I hope, take place through this. So I think what you need is, again, that is something that should have had more emphasis, which is how much allocation is done for green mobility, green energy transition, and for battery storage, and because what you need is much, and for transmission, the grid transformation, because the more renewables you get into the power generation, the more the bigger the need for the modernization of our transmission system. The review of foreign exchange management, I think, has been long overdue. I hope they will be made less restrictive, so that we can get surely but slowly move towards capital account convertibility going forward. Next. So this is the banking sector. This is a chart that we should be sending to the high level committee on banking, which is that there's a huge skewness in our banking system. 17 of the 743 districts, they account for 50% of India's total deposits. Now that is incredible. While 11 of the districts get 50% of India's total credit. I am hoping that these figures are not correct, because if they are, they really show a very wide discrepancy, and a skewness of the banking sector, which has to be changed, and which must be working upon. But I can assure you, listeners, that we have checked these figures more than once, and these are actually correct. These are from the RBI, from the quarterly spatial distribution of deposits and credit published by RBI itself. And please also notice that one state, accounts for 27% of the total banking credit in India. And while they get 27%, you look at all the northeastern states, all together they probably don't come up to about 3%, or of the total credit. So I think the banking sector needs needs to be perked up. Now that its NPAs are down well below, net non-performing assets are less than 1%, and even the gross are below 2%. I think their balance sheets are very good, but I think it is how the banking industry works, it is how the banking sector operates that needs to change, and therefore they should be incentivized to spread their credit wider and to try and get more deposits from all the rest of it, especially now that the credit to deposit ratio has been becoming quite poor for them. So therefore, banking sector has to gird up, has to get his act together to get both its deposits higher and its credit distributed more equitably across the country. Next. Um, Agriculture diversification from crop. This is very good to give the incentive to horticulture and husbandry and cocoa. So I think that's right. The entire coastal based the linkage incentive that she talked about, I think is also quite required. Services sector, education to employment and enterprise. The standing committee hopefully will do something about that. And the setting up of the 5 university townships. The time frame wasn't mentioned, but this is a incredible initiative, because what we need today is a much better quality of our higher education. And hopefully these 5 university townships will bring the best of private and public sector together to produce that, so that we stop I think about 3 billion, or it's probably more, dollars of funds going abroad for our children's education. And then the emphasis on Ayurveda. Finally, I think we are beginning to mainstream Ayurveda into our health system. 3 more new Ayurveda institutes, All India Institute of Medical Ayurvedic Sciences, I think very, very good. And this mention of geriatric care is good, because after 2031, our workers to total ratio declines, and we'll be about 300 million people above 60 years by 2050. So I think that needs attention. Next. So this I think is okay. Next, let's go on. So about ease of doing business, decriminalization of minor offences, Income Tax Act being simplified, litigation lowered, MSME benefits from faster payment through the trades duets and the corporate Mitras. But overall, I think there needed to be a much greater time-bound emphasis on reducing the regulatory and compliance burden. We have done some, but we are still long way to go to get the 60,000 odd regulatory and compliance cholesterol in our system going. So I hope the finance minister will consider setting up an interstate committee. Just like the GST Council, an interstate council for reducing the regulatory and compliance burden across the country, because a large part of that is in the states. Next. This is investments, the net FDI on the right hand side. That's not such a good sign. This is because although our FDI has increased, but our net foreign capital outflow has also increased, and I think we should look into that, because a negative $1.6 billion of net FDI will imply having to borrow externally to make up our current account deficit, which is a reasonable 1.2%, but I think even that it'll be better to finance it by equity flows rather than by borrowing. Next. So these are all the schemes that we have mentioned here. And here you can see that the actuals of 2025 are in several cases, and especially if you look at the Jal Jeevan Mission, we need to get the reason onto that. The 67,000 was budgeted, but only 17,000 was spent, and then now we have a 125%, a huge increase in the budgeted 26. So what was the reason for that? I think is something that we need to look at quite carefully. The other big increase that I can see here is in VB G, which is Manrega had 30,000, 88,000 but it's now gone up to 95, which is I think making sure that the social security net remains there. The production-linked incentive scheme for METI being reduced from 7,000 actual expenditure to 1,527 the budgeted is a bit of a surprise, because METI continues the electronics, the mobile phones, all the components. And that PLI scheme was doing very well because it was budgeted at 9,000, 7,000 was already spent, and that's been brought down to 1,527. A big surprise, but I hope something would be done about it. And then automobile components, that's gone up, but it would have been nice to see the again the white goods scheme for 304 spent, but increased to 1,004. The overall picture of the PLI schemes, if it had been given, would have been a good idea here. Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, just 300 crores spent out of 3,500, but again raised to 3,000. So that's something, the rural Yojana has done much better. Out of 54, 32,000 has been spent. So I think it's the urban Awas Yojana which needs to be brought up. On the PM internship scheme, out of a budget of 10,000, 526 crore were spent, and therefore the budget has now been brought down to 4,700. So I think the schemes need to be looked at very carefully. The NITI Aayog had a development monitoring evaluation office which was doing this very carefully when I was there. I think that needs to be revived, and each scheme has to be given a target to which they should. The mission on natural farming, they spent more than they were budgeted, but 750 crore for the whole year is, I think, much less than what is required for this very important transformation of our agricultural sector, which also helps carbon sequestration, because the evidence is there that zero chemical farming does improve the carbon content in the soil. Next. Next. So the only thing, just go back to one slide. Yeah, this is about the QCOs. The number of QCOs went from 14 to 150. They are now about 176, applying to 740 products, and they cover a lot of intermediate products. And that just means that all the sort of imports required for our exports first require a QCO certificate by people visiting, sort of the plants where these imports are coming from. So therefore, I think this is something that we need to be looking at more carefully, and the sooner these QCOs are, removed, the better off we are. So overall, friends, I think this is a budget which will continue to lay the infrastructure foundation for our economy, reduce the logistics cost, as it were, which is good. It's promising to raise the non-tax revenues by targeting higher disinvestment, which is very happy, and talking also about asset monetization now. And I think the promise to bring the debt to GDP ratio down to 50% by 2031 is a very good one, and I think we should. I hope that will be achieved, and it should be achieved, because one of the main things is in our country which makes our industry globally competitive is a very high cost of capital, and that remains high, and therefore that would need to be brought down by the government reducing its stake on domestic savings, which have also become lower. And as I said, and I will end there, which is that I was hoping that there will be a much stronger emphasis on triggering the positive private investment cycle, the private capex cycle. And I hope when the budget is discussed in the remaining part of the budget session, there will be some attempt to have a uh, time-bound effort at bringing all the states on board and and uh, and declaring a target for reducing our compliance and regulatory burden during the course of the year. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for that enlightening presentation and all the thoughts that you shared. We are now open for question and answers. Attendees are requested to share their questions in the chat box, and I'll be reading them out for sir to answer. So we have, sir, received a couple of questions. Um, so people want to know if there is any financial help for lead toxicity and if there is any provision for checking the lead content in soil and cosmetics.
Not that I know of, and I don't think that was mentioned, and that is something, it's a very good question, and I hope, uh, we should I hope we should bring it to the notice of the finance minister, because lead toxicity is not really recognized so far in our government fiscal policies, and I think it'll be useful for us to bring it to the attention, and therefore, because it is a silent sort of, debilitator of our children, because lead toxicity reduces the, the IQ levels and so on. So no, I can't see anything, but maybe it is in the details of the health ministry, and we should look at the expenditure details of the health ministry, and therefore, but again, to repeat what I said earlier, that our social sector expenditure or health and education together is about half that of our subsidies. Now that's a fiscal inequity, if you like, that has to be corrected. The sooner the better.
Sir, another question that we have is whether you think emerging technologies were given enough focus in our budget, and if it was, then which direction is it going to take our strategic autonomy to?
Well, I think there was a slide there, which showed about the seven sectors that the priorities were given to, and these were all, frontier technologies: semiconductor, rare earths, electronic components, which will contribute to AI. So I think all of those, especially the rare earths and the semiconductor, will hugely help our strategic autonomy and reduce our dependence on the imports of these commodities, because now these have been weaponized by many countries. And so I think we needed to build on that. And I think, therefore, this budget, by focusing on the seven frontline manufacturing sectors, along with, of course, talking about the legacy clusters, but the focus on the seven forward-looking frontier technologies, I think, is very welcome and will help to improve our strategic autonomy.
Sure, sir. Then we have another question around the carbon capture utilization and nuclear energy, which were given priority in this year's budget. Is there something that the government is looking at in terms of strategy out of this?
I think so. I think the carbon sequestration is a very good move, and the nuclear sector, as you know, has been now opened up to the private investors, so that will also help. But as we know, that the climate window is so short that mitigation and adaptation alone will not suffice. So we do need a clear cut policy and initiative on carbon sequestration. So I think the government's the budget's emphasis on pointing towards that is a very welcome one. My wish was that more could be done for natural farming and zero chemical farming, because just 750 crores for that would not suffice for having a large scale carbon sequestration program in Indian agriculture, because natural farming, we know, improves the organic carbon content of our soil, and which is now reduced to 0.3% when 1.5% is required to keep the soil arable. So I hope this budget for natural farming will be revived, and the Paramparik Krishi Yojana, Paramparik Krishi Mission will be given a real boost, in the year, because that is the way forward for not for our agricultural transformation and also helping our ecological security in a big way, because our soil is actually now in the ICU, which has to be changed. The sooner the better.
I fully agree, sir. And at the same time, we are seeing that the government is still increasing its allocation towards fertilizer subsidies.
Yes.
So there is another question that we have on the same lines. Has there been any cutting down of fertilizer subsidy, or are there any talks about increasing our budgets on natural farming?
But I answered that the second part already, which is that the natural farming, 700 crores was budgeted last year, 600 was spent, and now the budget is 750 crore, which in my view is not enough at all, and it should be. It's actually 2 years ago the budget was 2,000 crore, but not much of that was spent. So the point is about execution of the natural farming mission, and the natural farming mission much more attention has to be given by the Ministry of Agriculture on the real implementation of the natural farming mission in the Paramparik Krishi Yojana, as it is called, because it is yes still a sort of patchwork and it will not being mainstreamed. We need to mainstream it. We need to get the research evidence on how viable it is for us, for the small and marginal farmers, and how viable it is for how our food security, whether that be maintained. All the fears that are there should be discussed. So I think a huge discussion is now required in the public narrative as well as in the government circles on the viability of natural farming. And if that is done, then the budget allocation will be increased, as it, in my view at least, it should be increased. The rising subsidy on chemical fertilizers is a cause of concern, because it still continues with the sort of very lopsided composition of our chemical fertilizers, the NPK, which is much higher in favor of urea than the others, which is not so good. But today I was pleased to see the statement by I think Secretary Expenditure, which is that the proposal for the direct fertilizer subsidy to the farmer is on the government's table and the government's consideration. That is the way forward. The way forward is for us to figure out how much chemical fertilizer is required per hectare, what is the optimum level, and hand over that amount to the farmer rather than give it to the fertilizer companies. And if that farmer, the direct subsidy is given, then the farmer will have an incentive to reduce the consumption of chemical fertilizers and still maintain the soil's productivity and yield. And now that the data for all the farming households is with the government, we don't need to do too much work, and this is very feasible to make this big important switch for helping the farmers in the right manner, with the right incentives, and yet hopefully bringing down the use of and the subsidy to chemical fertilizers. I think the time for that has come, and it should be done now.
So we have another question on if you think challenge mode is the right direction to have most policies. This year's budget had a lot of things that needed to be done on challenge mode. So is the private participation a good thing, or should the government take the baton in its own hands?
I think the challenge mode is the right thing, that the right way to go, very much the right way to go, because the challenge mode means the participation of the private sector, and that's and that kind of public-private partnership, I think, will be the way to produce it, because that ensures better implementation than to do everything in the public sector, because the capacities, the execution, the implementation capacities are not as as good. They can be improved by bringing in the private sector. And as I said in my talk, in my remarks to begin with, the challenge mode for putting up one girls' hostel in every district in India, I think is such a good idea, and it should be implemented in the, in the time bound within the year, these hostels should be off the ground. But to repeat, the challenge mode is the right way to go.
So, in terms of making tier 2 and 3 cities as growth centers, do you think the budget announcement does enough? And what would be the direction that the private sector needs to take in order to actually make cities as growth engines?
While the provision of 10,000 corporate Mitras in the tier 2, 3 cities is certainly not enough to make them the drivers of, to make them growth drivers. What you need in tier 2 and 3 cities is a massive investment in urban infrastructure, urban planning, which is completely missing in most of these sectors. There was an initiative had been started in the NITI Aayog some years ago on how to get the urban infrastructure developed much better, because that is what is lacking. Because if the urban, what's happening in our country is that the private infrastructure, housing and colonies, etc., is getting along and is becoming high quality. But the public infrastructure, which is the roads, the sanitation, the water, and the workers' housing, the slums, they are actually increasing and the difficulties, and they're not developing as much as they can. So what you need to have is, for example, the is that a large more, I would give a much bigger incentive to real estate companies to create not just their own housing, but also to take care of the related infrastructure in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities. On the other part of it is Samriddhi, the making available credit without the huge amount of documentation and collateral to the small and medium enterprises, who will be the backbone of driving growth in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities. I think that's what, and as you notice, that particular credit flow has come down. It has to go up. And I think the small and medium enterprises, the collateral and the documentation and regulation required by a banking sector has to be significantly reduced to get the private sector investing and the private capex going up, especially in tier 2 and tier 3 cities.
So, your thoughts on what is the biggest expectation that you had from the budget and that was not met by the budget, and the best thing that you thought about the budget, the biggest highlight.
My expectation was on announcing some real measure on ease of doing business, on reducing the regulatory and compliance burden. My suggestion was to actually create a council of ministers because a lot of this is regulatory cholesterol is in the states, and that was I was hoping that will happen, and I still feel that ease of doing business is not getting the kind of attention that it deserves. My three cheers for the budget is on increasing the disinvestment target to 80,000 crore. I hope it will be achieved. I'm quite thrilled to see the Honorable Finance Minister in saying in a press conference that more is to be expected there. So I think that will go ahead. It should, apart from disinvestment and devolution, I hope it will also include outright privatization of some of the businesses that the government is in, because the Honorable Prime Minister has said very clearly that there are lots of businesses in which the government has no business to be participating. And these are some of the sectors also where the central public sector units like hotels and so on are making losses. So I think apart from this investment, which is the highlight, I think asset monetization and privatization would also be included, and that'll be the way to go.
Thank you so much, sir. We still have lots of questions. So I think we'll be writing back to the attendees on these questions. And
We can take a few
okay,
more
so
if
if
you
you
want.
allow, can we take a
Yes,
couple of more
yes,
questions?
yes, please.
Okay. Sir, there is a question around FDI. With FDI plummeting to its lowest, should India focus on attracting quality investments? And what should the ministry do in order to attract foreign direct investment?
What should the ministry do to attract foreign direct investment? Is that the question?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Yeah. I think, the government has done a lot already. Like, for example, liberalizing the insurance sector, permitting the private sector to come into the nuclear energy sector, the defense production sector. So a large amount, many sectors, I think, most, if like, have been opened up to foreign investment. And now also the announcement in the budget for the non-resident Indians to invest in equity will also help in increasing that. I think overall, the uh, but why if this is still not happening? Uh, by the way, just taking a step back, it's not as if we are not getting the foreign direct investment. We are. I think we got it's $6 billion this year, but our capital outflow has increased, and therefore the net FDI has become negative. So the one of the things to do for the government is to focus on why the net, why the capital outflow of our country has become as high as it has become. And I think that will help also in probably identifying the reasons for which some of our successful entrepreneurs are also shifting abroad. So that I think is a that I think is something to be done. On the FDI, otherwise, I think it's a matter of now finalizing our bilateral investment treaties with as many countries as we can. I think there's still many hanging there, so that we one. So to give them the assurance of due process and due litigation, that is one. And two, again, I think I am repeating myself. Even the foreign direct investment doesn't really know what will be the outcome of any action that they take because of the regulatory opaqueness that we have, especially at the state level. So unless that changes, and unless more and more of our states become transparent and facilitate the foreign investor, I think the FDI will not happen. So back to removing the regulatory cholesterol to attract higher levels of foreign direct investment.
Thank you, sir, for that answer. Also, people want to know your thoughts on the orange economy. So, the budget spoke about creating content creator labs in schools and colleges, and also upskilling initiatives for people working in the audiovisual, gaming, design sectors. Do you think this is going to be this is going to become a large sector in our economy? And does it have any like great future in terms of share to GDP and also in terms of attracting investments?
Well, given the given that all of this will be digital, and we have a pretty good talent pool for digital, I think this can grow. This economy can grow, and uh, but I'm not so sure as to how large it will become or how large an employer it will become. But it's but there is we have a good domestic market for for content users for this. So the Orange Economy Initiative, I think, is a good one. But what its future would look like will depend again on how quickly are we able to attract private investment into it, because it will be the combination of private capital, private talent, and and technology that will create that will trigger this orange economy off. So let's wait and see is the answer for that.
All right, sir. We'll be taking the final question. It talks about the infrastructure risk guarantee fund that the budget has spoken about. So the question is, keeping our track record of implementing the NIIF and NAPFID, will this credit rating infrastructure risk guarantee fund be able to come up in a year, and would it be any useful for the infrastructure sector?
It'll be certainly useful for the infrastructure sector because some of the risk can be then passed on for this fund, and it's kind of an insurance of when things go wrong. But how quickly it will take off is something that we can't comment on, and I can't say because that's something that we need to really focus on, which is, and maybe there's a work to be done here on what were the budget announcements last year and how many of them have been implemented this year. And I think that will give us an indication of how quickly this infrastructure risk fund will take off. But it's a good idea, it's a good initiative. The sooner it takes off, the better off we are.
Thank you, sir. That is all the questions that we have. In case people have further questions, please feel free to write back to us. And we'll also be sharing a recording of this webinar with the attendees. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you, sir, so much for taking out the time and helping us understand the budget better.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank
Great
you.
to be here. Bye. Bye bye to all.